let's take another step towards unpacking this toolbar completely. Let's start with this guy right here. This is our most basic fundamental selection tool called the rectangular marquee tool. Now, this is the most basic of the selection tools, and all it does is draw a square, like so, telling Photoshop that this is the area that I care about for the next step. Before going on to that next step and changing anything in the image, I'm just gonna go through the selection tools to show you the different ways that we can activate a selection. Square is not the only shape that you have an option to select. You can also select a circle. And by holding down Shift, you can constrain its proportions. So it's always a perfect circle like that. And if I let go Shift, I can draw an oval. Now for designers, you also have these single line tools. They're not often used in retouching and photography, but just know they exist. And if we want to make custom shapes, we can draw them out with the lasso tool. And there are modifiers for these tools as well. If you hold down Option or Shift, you'll see that the icon next to it changes to a plus or minus. Now you probably can imagine that a minus subtracts from the selection and a plus adds to it. So we also have some constraints for these tools. The polygonal lasso tool creates a straight line where you can let off the mouse and it still is holding onto the line and allowing you to just click around. And also the selections are not fixed in one place. So once you have one created, if you're still keeping one of the selection tools active, you'll see how the cursor changes to a white arrow. You can move these selections around to isolate different parts after you've already created the shape that you want. You can see that making selections by hand takes some precision and some practice, but Photoshop over the years has developed a number of automations and updates to these tools that just make it easier to create selections based on what's actually in the image rather than you having to really carefully draw your own shape. So that begins with the magnetic lasso tool. So Photoshop is going to try to help me by identifying the edges of the thing that I want to isolate. What I'm going to do is click, and you see Photoshop is working hard to identify the edges of this shape, and if I go slow enough, it can magically do a pretty good job of isolating that image for me. Let's take a closer look by zooming in. Now, it didn't do a perfect job, but it did a pretty damn good job. So what I could do is now go back into the lasso tool and manually refine some of the selections by holding down Shift. I can add to it and manually draw. I can subtract from it by manually drawing. But also I could use that magnetic lasso tool and hold down Shift, and it also adds and subtracts to a selection. So I can use the help to isolate that shape, close the selection, and it's active. So that did a pretty good job in a really short amount of time without a lot of effort to isolate that shape. Let's check out the magic wand. So when I mouse over, it tells me that this selects similarly colored image areas. And you can see that it's selecting chunks of the image based on the values that it finds in the area that you click on. I also have some controls for the magic wand tool. This is where you tell Photoshop how carefully to look at the area that you're clicking on. And we have all of these settings. And if you want to select based on a really large area of pixels, you can click 101 by 101, and you see how widely that sampled in order to create the isolation. Now, if I want to get really, really tight with the selection, I'm going to use point sample. So that's really looking at the value of the area that I just clicked by a single pixel and finding what its neighbors are to make this selection. So the sample size works in conjunction with tolerance. Tolerance is a setting where you tell Photoshop how many neighbors of that color on the color wheel to allow into the selection. So if I select a light blue, if I have a really high tolerance, it's going to look at a wider range of color in order to calculate the selection. If I turn that on really high, say 100, Photoshop's going to be really liberal with the range of colors it selects. So when I click on this, I'm telling it, look at this color of green. And green doesn't take up a lot of this area. It quickly shifts into these blues. So it's not going to select a very big range because that hue shifts quickly. But if I click on a blue, there's a lot of blue in this image, so it has a lot of pixels that it can select because they're all neighbors. You can also look at how it works with different colors. There must be a lot of warm hues in here because based on that red sample, it selected a whole lot of stuff down here. But you could see in an image like this, selecting with the magic wand using color range could be a good way to isolate like a foreground element in a landscape shot. Let's just quickly look at setting the tolerance pretty low to 10. Sort of has a similar effect to sample size. So what you can do is fine tune both of those settings in order to adjust the selection and more tightly or loosely create the selection. So 10, it's telling me we're only looking at a small range of blue values. This setting here, contiguous, notice when I click, it's only selecting blues in this area here, but there are really similar blues down here in the chair. So if I really want to make a selection based on color and not have it target a specific area of the image, I can turn off contiguous, and now notice when I click the right blue up here, it looks for that blue everywhere in the image based on the settings that you've created. Anti-alias is just basically how it renders the selection itself, and you should keep that on. Sample all layers. If I turn that on, I can turn on all the balloons, and Photoshop is looking at every single layer in the stack. And the last couple of settings up here are just how Photoshop deals with you making multiple selections. I rarely change these. If I need to change it to add to selection, I usually just hold down Shift. So you can see that those modifier keys are consistent for all of the different selection tools. So the magic wand is pretty powerful. You can just basically mess with those couple of settings and just click and go. It works great and fast. Now the quick selection tool is grouped in here with the magic wand because it works in a very similar way. It has fewer settings, but it works like a brush. So I'm going to increase the brush size here, and basically you just paint with this tool, just as you would with the airbrush. And once again, the same modifiers work. You can add or subtract, but changing the size of the quick selection tool has an effect on the range of colors that it's using to create the selection. So if I want to get finer detail, I can change the size of that brush smaller. You may be wondering when to use these different tools, and that's a good question because each one performs differently and each one is better than the other in any given situation. So the only way that you're going to really figure that out is to just practice with these tools. So if one's not working, hold off, move on to the next one and see if it performs better.